Just kidding.
Hello and welcome. My name is Janie Lazar, and this is yet another conversation, a very important conversation that matters. I have in the studio today with me Ron and Gloria, and Catherine White is our sign language interpreter for this evening. In fact, our sign language interpreter for the whole series. The purpose of these interviews is to, if you like, increase the learning, increase the awareness that I've experienced. Because as a hearing person in the world, what I've realised is that I know very little about the deaf world, the deaf community, what goes on there. And that was brought home to me very sharply a couple of years ago, working with Joanne Chester, who was one of my speakers for TEDx. My first words to her, "I'm sorry, I don't know how to do this." And it really made me realise I had an awful lot to learn. Ron and Gloria, you are very welcome. It's where to start. You two have had such amazingly full lives, and as coders, and for people who are new to this, children who have deaf parents. Coda, child of deaf adult. So it's a very different world that both of you grew up in. And by way of introduction, what I'd love both of you to do at different times, obviously, is to just give a little bit of an introduction to yourselves. I mean, Gloria, you're a playwright, a performer, and I've had great fun looking at your profile. And you have a different way of putting your message out there. And Ron, in your work over the years as a sign language interpreter, amongst other things, even though you both say you're retired, I know you're not exactly sitting around. Gloria, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, my Coda experience is rather different from most of the Codas who grew up within the deaf world as I did, but were taught to sign and were interpreters for their parents. The time when I was born, at that time, it was possible for hearing children of deaf adults to be taken away from their deaf parents. And when my brother was born, his mother was born hearing, family came over and said, "Oh, good, he could hear." They made big noises around his crib, and then they woke up crying. They said, my aunt said, "Oh, good, he can hear, good." Then then they took a chance, because at that time my mother had decided that her children were not going to learn to sign, because her parents did not want her to marry my father. My mother was very articulate. She spoke well, and she had help with her speech. My father did not. He signed. And my grandmother took one look at my father and she said, "What kind of fakakta thing is this with the fingers in the air? Your children are going to go like that and they're not going to talk, just like him. You shouldn't have children. You shouldn't marry him. What are you doing?" My mother was very determined. She was going to marry that man. Part of the reason why she wanted to meet him was because she knew that he came from a family like hers that were all hearing. They were the only deaf people in their families. And she figured, the odds were that if she married him and had children, they might hear. And that's what she wanted. So when my brother was born hearing, my father immediately said, "He shouldn't be alone. We should have one more." So they lucked out, as far as they were concerned, that I could hear. So the two of us and the two of them, two separate worlds, because we were not taught to sign. What we were taught was how to read. My mother read to us from the minute we were born. I swear we left the hospital with books. We got our first diplomas at a year old from the diaper service, because that was, she was determined to do that. So she read to us. She didn't read stuff like, baby stuff like Run, Spot, Run. I don't think she knew any of those books. It was Shakespeare. It was Tennyson. And I still remember some of the lines from those books. So by the time I started school, I could read, we could read, we could write. It was a wonderful gift that she gave to us. What we didn't get was my father. We could not communicate with my father, and we loved him. He was great. He was funny. He was gorgeous. I mean, there was no conversation. Then years later, out of the blue, my brother said to me about somebody he knew. He said, well, Bill is the father I never had. We both did that because for 13 years, I worked with an acting coach and he was a father I never had. So we both did that. So it was a wonderful gift that she gave us, but it was paid for, you know, in other ways. And then my mother was actually the one who mentioned Codas. And I went to a Coda meetings many years ago. And oh, great, you know, I never really met anyone, you know, with my experience. And I thought, well, we can talk about, you know, assigning and all. And I walk into a room full of Codas and you know what happens. I mean, right? I said, oh, I can't do this. Because it was not only that we weren't allowed, you just didn't do it. You would sooner pee on the rug than sign in front of my mother. I mean, you just didn't do that. And I couldn't, I left. And to make a long story a little shorter, years later, I met Tom Bull. Tom Bull wrote a book called On the Edge of Deaf Culture. Tom Bull is Mr. Coda. He has gone to every single Coda, you know, convention, and he collects people who write and who do, you know, what I was doing. He had gotten in touch with me. And I said, you know, I was just invited to do my show in New Jersey. And he said, oh, great. I know some people out there and I can, you know, you should contact them. And I said, there's a small problem. They're the ones I walked away from. And he said, just, you know, it'll be all right, write to them. I wrote a letter like this and I tried to explain why I walked away at that time. And they were very, very gracious. And they said, look, you are where you are at any given time. Took the show out there, they filled the house. And that was my first Coda dinner. It's my first contact with Codas aside from Tom. And it was a whole other world. My world completely changed. And to make another long story short, I started having my show interpreted. At a major festival in New York, the producer who was putting it on did not tell me that they had invited this woman who was the only hearing person in 10 generations of deaf, invited her to a show that was not being interpreted. I got a note from her. And they invited somebody who was deaf. And I got a note from him. Why are you doing this? And I said, I'm not. So I explained and I said, look, next time I do this show in New York, it will be interpreted. And I did. I was at a major festival and I found, I didn't realize this, but I found the premier theater interpreter in New York and she interpreted the show. I sold out 3 shows and got an award. And I also invited, friends of my mother's who were still alive. I mean, they had been a little younger. And the night before the show, I thought, what have I done? They're going to hate this. And they loved it. They loved it. One of them said, you know, your mother in heaven, very happy. And I thought, no, she's not. I'm not sure about that because I asked my mother was 95 when I finally told her what I was up to. And I said, how would you feel if I wrote a show about the way we grew up? And my mother in a millisecond said, after I'm gone. So I had already done it, too late. But she was happy about it later when I showed her that people had written nice things about it. So that was happy. But that show changed my life, completely changed. It's not just that the show was there, but this would never.
Ron's dying to get in there. Ron.
No, I just wanted to say that she talks about the challenges of growing up the way she did, but she's never negative about her mom or dad or anything. It's just, this is what it was.
This is what it was.
This is what it was. She's never negative.
I have a lot of my mother's story in the show. I have a lot of respect for my mother. I do. We know mother-daughter, but I have a lot of respect for her. And this is the last thing I'm going to say. The acting coach had never met anybody like me who had deaf parents. And he said, you have to write this down. I said, no, I don't. He said, yes, you do. I said, no, I don't. Because everything with my mother was very secret and very dignified and very private. And he said, I'm going to promise you 2 things. You will find community and you'll find a boyfriend. I never knew, we never knew. We thought the theater community, we never realized it would be the deaf and the Coda community.
And somebody from
And
the
this.
Midwest.
I knew it was never going to be in New York. That I knew. I thought if I do meet somebody, it's going to be somebody, one of those states out there. All I know is New York and California and then maybe New Jersey, but Ohio.
And Toronto.
The two things he promised me came true. And I wish he was here to meet Ron.
Probably knows.
My father would have loved this man. They could have signed, never mind her, they would have had a good time. I just know that. But the other thing I want to say to deaf parents, not just hearing parents of deaf children, that they should all learn to sign, but deaf parents, especially now when we have video, we have captions, who needs the kids anymore? You have to teach them to sign, or you don't have a family. You have to have a common language. Please, deaf parents of hearing children, teach them to sign. Not just hello, goodbye, how nice, and I love you. It's real conversation.
Yeah.
Because I didn't have that with my father.
It's so very important, and I'm glad you've emphasized that point, because that was going to be one of the key questions that I was going to ask you about what you would advise. What advice would you give to deaf parents? To deaf parents, it's so important.
And I really teach them to sign, because when they're 16 and walking out the door, you're going to want to know where they're going, and you want a real conversation. I never had a real conversation with my mother either, because she lip read. You know how tiring it is to stare at somebody, like that. She just looked blank after a while, and I would look at her, and I would know that words are coming out of my mouth, and they're going into my ear. They're not reaching her. And I would say to her, "Do you know what I said?" She would say, "Yes." I'd say, "Good. What did I say?" "I don't know." And Marlee Matlin said it best when she was asked, "Why do you travel with an interpreter?" And she said, "I get tired."
And for those that might not know, Marlee Matlin is she's an actor in movies, and she won an Academy Award. She's an Academy Award winning actor, and she travels with an interpreter, and she speaks very well, and she read lips, but she gets tired. And that was my thought, was like, oh, it wasn't that I was saying things that weren't interesting or stupid. It's my mother got tired. So it's not a conversation. It's not a conversation. You have to have a common language.
No, I completely agree with you there. Ron, what about your experience growing up? Exactly
the opposite of hers. And I just realized that now today, right this second. What time is it? Whatever. I just realized it right now, because I did communicate with my mom and my dad, and it was loving, and it was bonding, and it was amazing. But I didn't like to read. I hated to read. I could see at times my mom wondering what to do. I failed the 3rd grade. Still embarrassed about that. Still trauma. But anyway, I failed the 3rd grade. My mom didn't know what to do. She didn't know how to teach me how to read. There's a story that I tell when I was trying to learn to read. I would see a word, and I don't know what that word was, but I just used this word as an example. "Mom, what's this word?" And she would go, and this is the sign for enough in ASL, enough. Enough, right. "Oh, I got it. It's fulfilling, satisfying, it's whatever. I got it, However, I didn't know how to say it. Enough. And if I were to hear it over there, I would know what it is, but I couldn't put the two together. The verbal English and the sign in ASL for that thing, that enough. So now I have to go back to school, not have to, I mean, I'm back in school, and and I see that word again. And now I ask the teacher, what's this? Enough. Course, it's putting the two together that I could not do. And the teachers at school did not know that I was struggling with a language different than English, right? They knew, because I lived in a highly diversified ethnic neighborhood. We had Italians, we had, Polish and German and Italian, I said Italian, you know, all different kind of cultures there. They knew, oh, Mexican, how could I forget Bilardo? Mexican, right? So they all knew that their parents at home were speaking a different language. So they adjusted for them a little bit, right? You know, they knew that it was different. For me, no, they just thought my parents were just doing sign language in English. They didn't know it was a whole different language. So that's where I was in this vacuum all that time. And I didn't enjoy reading. I didn't like to read. It was too quiet for me. To read was too quiet. I gotta have, she'll attest to this, I gotta have the TV on, right? I gotta watch, you know, all these shows. And I was watching talk shows way young, just so I could hear them talk and just, you know, to have a conversation and listen to it. I remember that in the United States, they had Johnny Carson, who was on for 30 years, you know. I'd watch him every night. And I even got my mom to watch it because she was more in tune to English. So I would tell her his jokes and she got it. She understood it. So that was a nice bonding with us, you know. But now my dad, he's ASL, way ASL, you know. So he didn't get the jokes. He didn't get what Carson, you know, not need, you know, this. So yeah, so he didn't get it. So there's the difference between them two, you know, about our you know, hearing culture kind of a thing. So it was interesting growing up, and I didn't know what I was in. I was in this whirlwind and I had no idea what I was in, you know. Now as I got older, I did, you know, calm down and I started to read, and I read a lot, and I still I read, you know, I'd love to read a novel, just to read a novel and, you know, just enjoy. And I have, and I love them so much, but I'm always reading other things that I'm trying to grab information, you know, what's going on in this country politically, and what's going, you know, climate, you know, the change and all that. I read about all that. And so I'm constantly doing that, you know, and I just love to read, you know, but I wish I could have read Shakespeare and read, you know, a lot of these books that I didn't get a chance to read. So anyway.
It's really interesting for me, the contrast between your, if you like, your two upbringings, and it leads me on to, I suppose, coming, if you like, through two different upbringings and ways of working, but also then the connections that you then made because of the Coda community.
Yes.
And, you know, I suppose finding that community, because for me, as I understand it, Codas really live between two worlds all of the time. And to find yourselves in Coda communities where you don't need to explain anything.
Right.
Because other Codas know exactly what you mean.
Right.
In different ways, they've been there. They've been the interpreter for parents, for siblings, for friends who may come into the family home. But to be out in the professional world, the everyday world, and connecting with others who are doing exactly the same.
Right.
I mean, how did that feel to be, I suppose, talking without sign, because you were in the Coda world?
I'm not sure what the question is.
I suppose as both hearing and speaking people within a Coda community, you would understand both sides of that, because
Right.
you are the bridge between the two communities. But when you're with other Codas, there's no need to explain anything.
No, there are things that are it's a relief. You know, with Ron, there are so many questions I don't want to answer. You know, you don't want to answer anymore. It's so hard to explain, because what you usually get is, oh, that's so interesting, and you know they understand absolutely nothing. You know, there are things I can say to him, and he knows, he just instantly understands, even though I didn't sign in there. There is that difference. It actually is a very small difference, not as big a difference as I thought when I first met the Codas. It's much it is minor. And I thought it was so major that I couldn't even be there.
You couldn't get over it.
I couldn't get past it. I
Right.
couldn't, but it doesn't matter.
And for her, true, when she would go to and correct me if I'm wrong.
No.
When you
Oh,
would
believe me,
go,
I will.
when you when you went to your first, you know, there's Codas signing, and what do you have to sign for? You know, you're hearing, and you know, she didn't get that, so that was hard, you know, to get around that, and she did get around that,
to try to sign. And I had joined the sign language center in New York just because I really wanted to learn, and I wanted to just you know, just try it. And when I went there and I spoke to the guy, you know, who runs it, and I signed a little, you know, a little bit to him, he said, you sign like a deaf person, because I know the accent. I know what the facial expression should be. I get that. And he said, your signs are frozen. And I took level 1 3 times because I could not get over myself. 3. He's teaching. And I, you know, I have to, I never thought this would be true. I love watching him sign. I really love watching him sign. I do. I'll tell you that. I really do. And he's teaching, and it's becoming, it's like that feeling of, oh my God, I'm now peeing on the rug. I mean, I've said that twice. I just said that. But I've gotten over that. I have gotten over that. I freeze a little bit with this. My mother did teach us how to spell, but my mother was an incredible speller, and God forbid you spell something wrong. So I didn't even like to do that much, you know, with them. And I still freeze a little bit, but it's getting better. And and all the coders, they all sign, and I started signing a little bit. And then I realized they don't care how good or not good or perfect, because these are interpreters, you know, when they all say, oh, I don't interpret it that way, I interpret it this way, and that's an old sign. And I thought, oh my God, I'm not going to do anything here. It doesn't matter as long as you try. And I have been meeting some absolutely wonderful friends of Ron's, you know, who are deaf. They just appreciate me trying. And I'm getting looser, and I am able to talk to much more relaxed.
Because you still have the trauma of not being able to sign because you'd be in trouble.
Because I'd be in trouble.
Yeah.
Yeah. I signed to my mother once when she was 92 in a restaurant, in a store. I just waved, and I said, just, you know, look at me. And she had a tantrum. She was so angry. I walked away. I had to walk away. And I think that was the day I asked her why didn't we learn to sign? And she thought for a minute. She said, it was your father's idea. My father was gone by then. I couldn't ask him. I knew it was never his idea. It was hers. And she did it to keep us. But, you know, by the time she was 92, you know, we weren't going to be taken away.
You're not going anywhere.
But somebody said to me, your mother wanted to pass. She did not want to be seen as deaf in public.
Yes.
It was okay when she was with my father, because they were wonderful. They had a wonderful marriage. He was probably the only person in the world she really trusted. Yeah. But when it was just her and me, she wanted to be seen as hearing, you know. And if I went to the doctor with her, I would have to tell the doctor very quickly, do not look at me, look at my mother. Look at my mother, look at my mother. Otherwise she'd get angry.
You've raised a few interesting points there. What I love is the fact that you both understand, if you like, where you've come from, and there's certain things you just don't need to explain. You just instinctively know, because you things don't need explaining. It's as simple as that, because you've been brought up within, if you like, that environment. Right. So no explanation is needed. You've touched on one thing which I think is really important, and it's something that I feel should happen in every country, is that sign language, and particularly if I bring it back to Ireland, I would love to see Irish Sign Language taught in schools. Even just the basics, just so that, as you say, everyone appreciates it. It doesn't matter where you go in the world. If you go to Italy, even if just somebody says a few things to you as a courtesy, as to acknowledge that you're there, that you can begin to try and communicate and to connect. And you said then people just, even if you said something and it wasn't quite as the interpreters would sign, the effort was appreciated.
Yeah.
And I can just imagine we've got a case going on here that I touched on earlier before we started to record this. And the two youngest boys are twins. And one of them is profoundly deaf. And I would love to see them being able to do almost little videos that could be, just run a very basic program that could be shown every morning for even 5 minutes in school. Today's word or today's expression, just something, so that if there is a deaf child in the school or in their community, there can begin to be that connection rather than in the silos.
Right. Well, in the United States, a lot of schools are now offering ASL as a second language. And the interesting thing is, this is something I just realized recently. ASL, not ASL, but maybe family sign or sign language was in fact my first language. Because when I use it with Ron, I feel like we're speaking the same language. I feel like when I listen to him and I see him sign, he is signing my first language, because that's what I saw. I saw them. I knew it's, that's such a bond between us, is that in fact we did have sign as our first language. I just wasn't allowed to use it, and I'm not fluent, but the feeling is there. To say something to him in sign means so much more than saying it in English. It just does, and that is a very strong connection between us, which I would never have with a hearing person. It's like we're not. It's like we're sort of hearing people, but we're not hearing people.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, in Ireland, ISL is our third official language.
That's
and
right. What's second?
Second?
No, what's third?
Third, English, Irish sign.
Of course.
So the act was brought in 2017. I'm pretty sure it's 2017. Catherine, correct me if I'm wrong. And it was enacted at the end of 2020. Yes.
I'm curious as to why Irish is not the first language.
I know.
Oh,
let's not even go there. I mean,
Okay.
Is
that the wrong question?
Yeah, I'll tell you.
Another conversation.
I'm trying so hard to get here.
And I'm reluctant to say very comparatively, or how can I say this tactfully, the majority of people do not speak Irish, and yet it is a requirement for certainly anybody working in any kind of government position or state employed position, certainly in teaching. So you could be the best teacher in the world, but if you don't speak Irish, even though, let's not go there, but sign language could be incredibly beneficial and encompassing.
Yeah.
And
it's always about hanging on to your culture is what it is. You're hanging on, and language is culture, and that's what's going on. It just, you're hanging on to that.
It is. I mean, in from what I see with sign language, it's not word for word. It's about the body. It's so much more. And Irish people, like many Europeans, as in I suppose French, Spanish, Italian, it's more about gestures. It's the whole body speaks.
When I took the sign language class, the hardest thing for them to teach these kids who are so focused on their cell phones and on there's nothing. It's like there's nothing there. There's no affect. Trying to teach them that is really difficult. Yeah. It's difficult for me to watch it.
Facial expression.
The facial. So we teach
facial. That's our sign for it. Yeah,
facial expression.
Yeah,
it's like
and language could take us into many different realms.
That's
and kids now can only seem to text. You ask them a question or to make a phone call, but that's again another conversation.
Yeah.
And one thing for me, language. The only reason I'm a sign language interpreter is because of my parents. Individuals that are not Codas, individuals that are just that, you know, get into American Sign Language to learn it and maybe be an interpreter, those individuals love language. They love language. And that's what drew them into sign language as opposed to maybe something else for whatever reason. So they love it. They study it. They got all these words for what this is and all this stuff. I don't know, you know, and to be honest, you know, I don't care. I just do what I do, you know. And he said, oh, well, that's good, whatever that is. Oh, thank you. I don't know what she said. I don't understand, but, you know, I just do what I do, you know. So I'm very appreciative of individuals who come cold, no sign language at all, no understanding of deaf culture, nothing, and then go from that to being an excellent, fabulous interpreter that's certified is amazing to me. That's amazing because that's very difficult to do. It really is. So,
What would your advice be to youngsters today? Because, you know, as I say, most of them are busy twiddling on their phones. Even the ability to communicate is a challenge for them. But quite often using a phone as a device to communicate with the deaf person can help break the ice.
mm-hmm.
And I'm just wondering if there's an opportunity there to encourage kids to at least begin that process of interaction.
You're talking non-Codas or
Just
two different things.
children anyway who might encounter a deaf
Yes.
child.
As I said, I think you got to be interested in language. I think language, in my opinion, I'm not saying I'm right, but in my opinion, you have to have that fascination with language to be drawn into interpreting it or sign language at all, in my opinion.
I think if I'm right, were you just talking about a hearing person encountering a deaf child
Yes.
and how to communicate with that child? If they don't, if the child only signs, there's not going to be any communication. But you know, there are people who have made childhood friends, and I know people who have done this. Oh, I had somebody, if I encounter somebody who was hearing and knows sign language, I say, how come, if it wasn't in your family? Oh, because I had a friend across the street, or I had an aunt who was deaf. So
Yes.
I wanted to communicate, and they learned to sign, and they actually could become interpreters, became really involved, you know, in the learning and really wanting to learn to sign because of that early childhood experience. When you come to it cold and there's nothing. Also, you have to have parents who tell you that people who are different are okay. It's okay that people are different. There are people who are different from us. They have different religions. They have different cultures. They have different thoughts. We get along. We understand that, and we communicate, and we know it. But you have to have parents from the get-go who say that's okay. Not that person's not Irish. That person's this, or that person don't play. So when they encounter somebody who is deaf, that's another planet. You know, there's no context of accepting a person who is a little bit different. And then there's this thing called the green monkey. You take a monkey out of the forest, paint him green, throw him back in. The other monkeys will kill him because he's different. And it's okay when you meet a green monkey, don't kill him. Talk to him. What does it feel like to be green? What's that about? But you have to have the background of parents who will do that, or a child who's smart enough to know that people are different. And my parents may be wrong. That's an exceptional child.
Mm. I think kids now, though, are more accepting of each other.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, they really are.
You know, they accept whether their friend is gay. We were having trouble keeping up with everything at the moment. But I think kids,
true. Yeah, and that's good. That's a positive, good thing.
Yeah. And I've had a lot of people in the gay community relate to my show, not because the whole deaf thing, but because they're different. They were different from their parents. And that's the message of the show is that it has to be that universal, again, that universal language and the family acceptance. If you want to have a family, you accept everyone in it, no matter their differences, and speak the same language.
That's right.
One of the things I'd like to touch on, Gloria, is really, I suppose, to people communicate their message in different ways, and obviously through your show, Listen, Can You Hear Me Now, which I'd encourage anybody to go onto Facebook, look up Gloria Rosen, have a look at it. They're amazing snippets, little videos, which will give insights into what the show is about, so that when it's on again, people can book and see that. But different people who, if you like, not gone to interpreting or teaching within the deaf community, but have pursued different careers, different forms of, whether you call it creative expression, but are helping to raise awareness of, I suppose, what it's like to grow up within the world, being different. And I suppose my question, very badly expressed this evening, is, especially when I work with words all the time, it's quite ridiculous, is what advice would you give to particularly deaf youngsters when they're thinking about, what will I do when I grow up? So whether they're deaf, whether they're hard of hearing, but there are very many things. When I look at, we mentioned the Geary twins earlier, they, as brothers, are so bright. Callum, yes, he is deaf, but he is so quick, so intelligent, he's so expressive. I've no doubt that he's just going to absolutely fly, despite what has happened, if you like, with a very big hiccup for many years in his education. But what would you say to youngsters in trying to find where they tap into that creativity?
It's their choice. When my mother grew up, and they found out, my mother's parents didn't know she was deaf until she was 12 years old. And that's the first time she went to...
I didn't know that. 12 years
It's
old.
in the show.
Oh.
There's so much in the show that you can't really absorb everything at once. So it's okay. Yeah, they would hit her if she didn't answer. And then a neighbor came in and they said, "Why are you hitting her? Don't you know she can't hear?" Now, at that time, the schools were not teaching sign. You were not allowed to sign. You had to learn. They're forcing those children to speak. That's the way you have to fit into the hearing world. This is where you're going to fit in. You have to learn to read lips, which my mother did. She graduated first in her class for lip reading, and you cannot sign. Of course, once they walked out on the street, they were all signing to each other. Mm-hmm. Now, what they're saying is, it's your choice. It's your choice. If you want to learn just to speak and you want to really work at it, and you can do that, and you want to be more in the hearing world, fine. If you want to stay, if you're comfortable in the deaf world and you want to sign and you don't, it's your choice. Do not force them to do what they don't want to do. It has to be their choice. I would never say, "Oh, you should learn to speak," or "You should learn to sign." It's a choice. It's the child's choice. What I'm saying to parents is, it's not your choice to not speak to your child. It's not. Let me take that back. It is your choice. What you're going to lose is your family. If you don't teach that child, if you don't learn, if you have a deaf child and you're hearing, learn to sign. If you're deaf and you have a hearing child, learn to sign. Have a common language. But as far as what that child wants to do later in life, hands off. It's your choice. Do not force them to do anything they don't want to do. And
But
they
the
can be
key,
very,
but
very successful, whatever they're very, very successful deaf people who do not speak, doesn't matter. It's their choice.
but certainly in the early part of life, have a common language.
For the family, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, common language. I met this person in a clothing store, and he was a stock person, and I asked him a question, and he said, you know, he indicated he was deaf, not thinking that I would, and I signed enough to explain that, yes, I understand my mother and father were deaf. And we talked a little bit, and I said, what about your family? And he looked at me and said,